Welcome to the PPM Attorney Capital Forum. I'm your host, Darin Mangum, securities lawyer. I'm also the managing partner of the law firm of Mangum and Associates. We're a nationwide and international securities law firm. We've been practicing over 23 years now. So, obviously I appreciate everyone joining. And like always, this is a weekly event that if you're participating live, you'll certainly be able to submit questions and in the chat, and we'll cover some of those questions. And we're also starting to receive some preliminary questions as well, either through email or you can certainly text us as well. My cell phone is 801-787-9072. And so if the chat feature is not working for you, then you can certainly text me during this event. And this is going to be recorded, so anybody that's a subscribing member will have access to obviously the live forum sessions, but also any of the recorded sessions as well. So today we are talking about investor types and where to find them. That's my first question. Whenever we have a new client, I'm always asking them, when they're talking about, what kind of offering they're doing and what kind of regulations are applicable to them. Invariably, I'm always asking them first and foremost, what kind of investors do you want? Because that's something that's completely in your control. There's lots of different kinds of investors, just like there's lots of different types of fish in the sea, right? So, and I always ask people, well, do you want to go whale hunting, or do you want to go fish or bass fishing? Are you wanting to hunt tuna, or are you wanting to hunt minnows, right? So lots of different sizes of fish, lots of different types of and sizes of investors. And that really determines not only the regulations that are applicable, but also it determines where to go find them. Because like if you're going to go whale hunting, the whales don't hang out in the lake. You got to go out. You got to go on the open ocean, right? And you're not going to find any whales just in a little bass boat. You got to build maybe spend some money and build a bigger boat, right? Because you're going to be bringing in these bigger fish, right? And so, ideally, most entrepreneurs, most clients, they have a dream that, hey, wouldn't it be great if I just get one check from one investor that fund the whole project, fund the whole enterprise, fund the whole deal? Wouldn't that be great? And that sounds great in principle. Sounds like it's easier, but that's kind of what we call whale hunting, right? You want one big whale investor to write the full $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, whatever amount you're raising. You want them to write the full check and be done, right? Well, the issue with that is obviously if they're putting up all the money, they're likely all going to want all the say-so. Generally speaking, the larger the investor, the more control that they expect, the more hand-holding, or not hand-holding, the more they feel they want to feel like they're VIPs and be up in your business, all the time. And so, as far as types of, let's dive into the investor types. There's a handout along with this video. And for subscribers, we're going to be trying to send this out ahead of time to you so you have it. But for those of you that are joining us on your own time, the recorded version will have an outline of the topics, and so you can follow along. But we're going to jump into investor types, and then we'll talk about where to find them. Angel investors. Lots of talk about angel investors, with the idea that they come out of the sky and somehow they save your business or they fund your entire business. Usually, angel investors are typically. We're going to talk about venture capitalists as well. Angel investors are just individual VCs, right? That they're usually investing. Usually, they're successful business people that they've sort of had a home run. Now they've got lots of money. Maybe they sold their business, and they now become, because they've got all this money and all this time on their hands, they kind of turn into, they would consider themselves angel investors, right? Just because you have a lot of money and just because you've had a lot of success doesn't mean you're like a brilliant investor. But an angel typically is somebody that has the capacity to write a check for, anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, right? I would consider an angel investor. Typically a lot of people try to seek angel investors, and they're found in different places. We'll talk about where to find these various categories of investor later. But angel investors, typically they are somebody that could write a check for a large amount. They're always invariably they're also accredited, but these are they consider themselves professional investors. They usually group, sometimes they come in as a group, sometimes they're just an individual person, but basically an angel is just somebody with a lot of money. I've seen, my dad, for example, is he used to, before he retired and got old, he's, 85 and still very active, but for a time there, he had some successes, had a couple home runs, sold his business, sold a few companies, and so then he had the luxury of maybe investing in some deals, right? He could write, I'll put 100,000 here, 100,000 there. He could, he considered himself an angel investor. Wasn't the smartest investor, he. Didn't, sometimes in deals, he just didn't do a lot of due diligence. He just liked the players involved and liked the deal. And, a lot of investors are that way. They go, they kind of fly above the seat of their pants, and, but not always. Some of them are smart enough to go ahead and, retain counsel, because the whole idea, an angel is like, okay, now I've made all this money. Now I want to grow it, but then again, I don't want to lose it all either, right? So anyway, so an angel investor is just a person with a lot of money that could write a big check. The next category is venture capitalists. Obviously, angel investors consider themselves a VC. Venture capitalists are more like a they have a lot of VC venture capital firms, they basically pool capital and put together like a fund with, and angel investors may invest in their fund, and they typically take higher. They typically invest at a very early stage, maybe not the seed round, although some do. An angel investor would likely be a candidate for a seed round. A seed round meaning your very, very first round. That usually an angel investor or some of these other kind of investors would invest in a seed round. VCs sort of get involved maybe in a secondary round, like what we call a Series A, meaning that you've already raised some capital, you're already in business, maybe or maybe you're not. Maybe you are, or maybe you're not cash flowing already, but you are at least, it's not your first rodeo. VC would usually come in at a second, still early stage, like a pre-IPO, but they're looking to invest early and grow. A lot of venture capital firms, they have the way that they like it, and when you come to them with a PPM, that you've put together, or your securities attorney has put together, maybe the deal terms are great, but, typically they're going to want more, right? Because they're also considered sometimes like a whale investor. They're going to write one check, or maybe they're going to participate with a few other investors, but they're going to expect some preferred equity position. They're not just going to be satisfied with just plain common stock. Like an angel investor, they may come in and say, "Oh, I'll just buy a big chunk of the company, or I'll buy, I'll invest just straight common equity." Whereas a VC, they're going to say, "Well, we want to have a preferred return." They're going to want to, and they typically are going to have their own staff do their own due diligence, and usually they're going to tell you how they want to do it. Because they say, for us to invest, it has to be this way, and this is and they're probably likely going to beat you up on valuation. You come at them, say, "Oh, I want $1 a share." They're going to come back and say, I don't think so. Let's and not always. VCs are just like angels. Sometimes they're not driven by, they're not the smartest people in the room, but they typically do have resources. They have accountants and analysts at their disposal that they can analyze deals. But sometimes they'll rush in because they have the fear of missing out, FOMO, and they just maybe they skirt over some due diligence. But ultimately the VCs, they're all answerable to their investors, typically a VC fund, right? So they don't want to do anything too crazy. Whereas an angel investor, they're typically just investing their own money, and if they lose it, well, they're not going to, they don't have to go to answer to anybody, but their spouse, maybe. But anyway, so that's a difference. VCs, usually they'll dictate, like a preferred return requirement, and usually an exit where they, if a multiple that they're going to require in the event the company is sold, they're going to want a 2x, 3x type exit, right? Not always, but that's really what they're seeking, right? So I've seen clients that'll get all excited because they just landed this great VC deal with a VC. Yeah, great. I got my $20 million from a VC firm. Oh, that's great. That's super great. What are the deal terms? And it's like, well, if we don't perform at a certain level, if we don't hit a certain EBITDA within a year, then we all get fired, or they convert to common equity and they take over, and you see this a lot where the VCs, they've got all these hooks in the deal terms where it's great to get all that money from one source, but then if things don't go according to plan, then they usually reserve the right to fire the CEO, which is usually the founder. And so this is why sometimes you see a founder will lose control of their company within a year or two of getting the funding, because maybe things didn't turn out so well, and usually there's a VC behind that saying, okay, we're going to protect our investment, and so we're going to force you out and then put somebody else in. And sometimes they'll do that as a condition, right? Like, hey, we're going to fund your deal, but we want to put in a new CEO. And oftentimes, they're doing that to also help the company, right? And sometimes that's needed. Sometimes they'll ask for a board seat so they have visibility into the deal. So again, angel investors may or may not ask for that, but a VC definitely will, right? So it's important to have those expectations growing in, that saying, hey, if I'm dealing with a VC, they're likely going to come back and want all these hooks in the deal, and ultimately you just have to decide, is it worth it? Is it worth it to give up this, maybe not immediate control, but the prospect of possibly losing control, being forced out if things don't go exactly according to plan, And so you definitely want to be represented by counsel anytime you're dealing with a VC. They've got lawyers working on their side. You definitely need to be represented by counsel on your side. So, and also VCs take a little while longer too. Not always, but they got to take their time and do the due diligence and all that. Whereas angel investors may be a little quicker on the draw, because why? It's their money, right? If they're putting a sizable amount, maybe it's going to take longer because they're going to negotiate and all that stuff. But yeah, that's sort of kind of the difference between those types. Moving on to institutional investors. Now that's a whole different level. I mean, we're talking about pension funds, retirement funds, large institutional type investment banks that do invest. We're talking about insurance companies. These different kinds of investors. They are unlike a VC, unlike an angel. They're going to take forever to close a deal. They just, again, they're going to be usually super ultra conservative. They're not, in these cases, institutional investors are not looking like a VC and an angel. They're looking to maybe double, triple their money over a certain time horizon. Institutional investors, they're looking at really just protecting that money and wanting it to grow. And so you likely will get, not always, but sometimes you'll get better deal terms with an institutional investor. But usually we're talking about, they're not going to be putting up, they're not going to be throwing in $100,000 or, $1 million. I mean, you're talking about usually institutional investors, you're funding, at least 10, 20 million at minimum, right? And oftentimes, some of the same deal terms would apply that a VC would ask for. But as far as preferential returns, control of a board seat, different things like that, depending on how active or passive the institutional investor wants to be. Oftentimes, they're not going to be investing in a seed round. They're not going to be investing in a Series A or a Series B, but maybe they may come in like at a pre-IPO stage if the deal was attractive enough, right? But yeah, just don't go hunting for an institutional investor to fund your startup. It's just not going to happen. You waste a lot of time and money, and you're not going to get there, right? But institutional investors, they typically like debt. Debt. If your company is cash flowing or your business is cash flowing, and they could see that their money is protected, then yeah, they're definitely going to will be more attracted to that. Especially if you have hard assets, things like that. Okay, so family offices is another category. These are basically rich families, like family money. So it's not just an angel investor, but typically they're more, usually angel investors will then progress and maybe set up a family office. It's sort of basically, and usually a family office is basically, sometimes it's run by the family itself, the wealthy family that maybe sometimes they actively run it themselves, but oftentimes they'll hire professionals that would then oversee their portfolio of investments. And, they're oftentimes treated that they move at the same pace oftentimes an institutional investor does, but they're really more like a hybrid between a family office is kind of like a hybrid between an angel investor and a VC, right? They're they have the ability to move quickly depending on how much who's the ultimate decision-making authority. Sometimes the investor, sometimes the family office or the family that's behind the family office that has the wealth being managed. Sometimes they're not even involved at all. They have professionals that are running the show, and then sometimes they are the ultimate decision maker, right? So when dealing with a family office, you want to try to find out up front who is the ultimate decision maker, who you're going to be pitching. Sometimes if you meet a wealthy individual, like on a at a golf game, or you're on a vacation somewhere in an elevator or at dinner. I mean, there's lots of ways to meet these kind of, and sometimes you think, well, maybe I'm dealing with an angel type investor, but then they have an organization and a procedure. Typically, they have a family office that handles all the details, right? So they may get really excited about the deal, but ultimately they're going to hand the ball over to their money, whoever's running their family office, and maybe they're excited enough about your deal to kind of push, the deal forward, and ultimately maybe whoever's running the family office and making decisions on that obviously is going to maybe be deferential to the principal, whoever is behind the family office, but at the end of the day, they also know that, hey, the reason why we set up this family office, the reason why we put this professional in place is to protect our assets, right? Yeah, we want to grow it, but we don't want to be stupid either, right? And so you definitely want to. Family offices are all different shapes, sizes, and have their own procedures. But don't expect a quick answer, although that's certainly possible if, in fact, like I said, the principal behind the family office, the ultimate wealthy person behind it, is the decision maker, or can really kind of push the deal forward and say, hey, I want to do this. Let's do this, right? As long as all the things are checked out, due diligence. Usually they'll have an attorney involved and things like that. So, if you're dealing with a family office or any institutional investor or a VC, don't count on a quick close. Angel investors are probably quicker on the draw, but family office is going to take some time. So if you need your funding within 30 days, don't count on it. It's going to take a while for them to do their due diligence. And obviously, the more prepared you are, like if you have a PPM ready to go, if you have all your ducks in a row, then that could go really quickly. But you just want to be prepared, and the nice thing, the benefit of them is they're writing usually a big check. Sometimes they're going to participate with some other family offices that they know, but invariably they're usually going to be participating by themselves. But a lot of the deal terms are going to be very similar to like a VC or something like that. So, moving on to accredited investors, this is sort of like, like I said, angel investors are oftentimes also accredited. The accredited is more of a legal definition, basically somebody that has either a net worth of $1 million or they have income of $200,000 or more, right? Typically, an accredited investor, they're not also considered an angel investor, because an angel investor, pretty much that's all they do. I mean, they're either retired or they've already made their money. Whereas most accredited investors, they're continuing to be working. A lot of doctors, dentists, professionals, I was going to say attorneys. A lot of attorneys are accredited investor. I'm personally an accredited investor, but as a general rule, if you're trying to sell an attorney anything, number one, it's probably not going to be a large investment, and number two, you're going to spend a lot of time with them, because attorneys are a little anal that way. Even especially if they're not a securities attorney. It depends, but I would generally avoid attorneys trying to sell. I mean, if you happen to have an attorney investor, that's fine, but attorneys do tend to be either litigious or overly analytical. Believe me, I know. So I've had clients, they've tried to sell attorneys, and they just beat their head against the wall, and never ending series of questions. And so a lot of times they're like, when they find out the investor's an attorney, they just decide, you know what, I'm going to move on, right? They're not going to, spend a lot of time with them. Not because they have anything against attorneys, or not that they have anything to hide. It's just a matter of they just don't want to deal with it. Whereas some dealing with like an accredited investor that's like a dentist or a doctor or other kind of professional, a lot of securities professionals are accredited. Obviously the people that work, that are executive officers of your company, or they're also considered accredited. So, those are, again, a lot faster decisions. They make their own decisions. And, sometimes accredited investors do have, other professionals. And so, like I said, angel investors are also accredited investors, but not the other way around. A lot of accredited investors are, just, high income earners, executives, business owners that investing isn't their full-time job or their hobby. But they have significant assets and significant, amounts to invest that they would be considered accredited, right? And that is important when you're dealing with, different exemptions, right? Because some exemptions, which we'll talk about, I think, John had a question about exemptions. We'll get into that after a little bit later. But as far as accredited investors go, that is something that is the person, it's going to dictate, certain exemptions just are restricted to only accredited investors, right? Or and so anyway, we can get into that. But and then of course we have non-accredited investors, who are the majority of investors in in the investing public. Mom and pop down the street, not accredited, not high net worth, but they have money to invest, right? They most of the time people are, if they're not accredited, they're likely their opportunities to invest are going to be limited to like a mutual fund, maybe individual stocks. Usually it's they're going to go to a broker dealer like, Merrill Lynch, or, maybe they're going to do their own brokerage account, TD Ameritrade, but they're going to be only investing in typically registered securities. They're not going to be investing, for the most part. They're not going to be investing in what we call exempt transactions, or Regulation D PPMs, just because they don't have access to it, right? And there's lots of reasons why, but now, that's why, regulation crowdfunding that we've talked about, that is specifically designed for non-accredited people. So most of those non-accredited folks are going to be steered into either publicly traded securities or mutual funds, or now they can participate through a regulation crowdfunding offering, or they certainly could participate in a Regulation D offering, like a 506B offering. But obviously in those offerings, you can only take it to 35 non-accredited people, right? So that's a limitation on that. And so a lot of non-accredited people, they just don't have access to those. And that kind of leads us into, where to find these kind of investors. A non-accredited investor, for example, would need to go. The only way they can really invest in anything is through a crowdfunding platform that's a regulation crowdfunding offering, or they could, if they happen to know of an entrepreneur like yourself that is offering a 506B offering and they have an existing relationship, then in that case they could possibly invest through the PPM in, say, a 506B offering, right? If you're doing a 506c offering, then they could not participate. So, or if you're doing like a Regulation A offering, which is again is a registered offering, we'll talk about that. Registered offering, certainly a non-accredited investor could participate in, but otherwise no. So non-accredited investors, they're going to write any, rarely would they invest any more than $50,000. That would probably be I would say most non-accredited people, they're not going to be investing a whole lot, because why? They don't have the income level as a credit, or they don't have they're typically investing small amounts, like under regulation crowdfunding, they're investing $1,000, even less, $100, got a client right now, they're putting in a cannabis deal where a non-accredited investor could invest $10. Obviously, they're trying to, with non-accredited people under regulation crowdfunding, it's all about volume, But anyway, let's talk about where to find these investors. Now, when we're talking about, networking is going to be how you're most likely going to find, oftentimes, investors through people who know people, right? And for example, if you're a member of the forum, we're glad to introduce you to various sources that do have access to family offices, angel investors, accredited investors, and so network like the PPM Attorney Capital Forum and other groups that have access to these kind of investor groups. Then that is probably the best and easiest way to get started, unless you're just a really great networker and people and you're able to get in and meet with people. Then some people have that talent, or they know somebody that has that ability to open doors, get a meeting with Elon Musk or whoever. They're able to somehow get into those networks, and so that's certainly a great resource to have. But also there's online. There's different networks on different platforms, like crowdfunding platforms is a great way to get exposure to non-accredited investors as well as accredited investors. There are some online networks or platforms that just dictate strictly to accredited investors. So it's not a crowdfunding offering platform, but they're sort of a closed members only group where they're able to sort of list different different offerings and get access to investors, right? And obviously, if you're able to find, if you're looking to do a public offering, or even a private placement offering of a large amount of like 20 million or more, then, you could certainly develop a relationship with a broker dealer. Obviously a broker dealer or a placement agent, they're going to be charging a pretty hefty upfront sales commission. And obviously, and most of the time, again, they're not interested in doing deals that are less than 20 million, 25 million, then you may get their attention. If it's anything less than that, you're just going to waste your time. They're just not going to be interested in doing a small deal. And so placement agent, which is basically a registered securities rep that, basically is not a broker dealer, but they may be affiliated like an independent with an independent broker dealer. Usually it's like a single person that is sort of hired on to sell the offering, find investors and do that kind of thing. We could talk about finders as well, but that's probably a longer discussion. But anyway, network, finding these sorts of people that, or that know the investors or can get in contact with the investors and present your deal, right? So the last category here, industry-specific associations. There are some advantages to networking within some of these organizations. Like for a prime example of that is we had a client who was a dentist and developed some dental technology, and they were able to. It was a highly technical application of some dental technology. Yeah, kind of. It would be a little bit difficult for regular investors to understand it, but people that are in the industry understand it and could see the value, and so they decide they're going to use their membership in different dental professional associations to, kind of open the door and saying, hey, I know we know each other through this association. You're a fellow dentist, for example. We have this product that I think you'll really understand. So that within the industry, obviously you're going to get probably a better, a more sophisticated investor that really could see the value in maybe what you're doing, as opposed to trying to explain it all to them. Right. So, anyway, so these are various strategies to find investors, different places. Like I said, these whales hang out in certain places, and minnows hang out in other areas, and so it really depends on what kind of investors you want. That'll really dictate where you spend your time and your resources to go and find them. And so, like I said, for members of the forum, if you email us, message us, we're glad to introduce you to some of these capital sources that may be a good fit for your business. And so that's something that we don't really make any money off of. It's just kind of a value add for members of the forum, and obviously if you need more help beyond just the forum, education-wise, if you need a securities lawyer to represent you in either putting together the PPM or dealing with a VC or a family office trying to negotiate that, then our law firm is obviously available to do that, right? So anyway, we're going to take some questions that have come in while we've been talking. Mary has a question about Form D. When do we file Form D? Form D is we've talked about it before, but is basically a notice of exemption, meaning that you're claiming exemption for the offering under Regulation D, and so the SEC requires you to file the Form D. And Form D doesn't, even though we oftentimes file Form D early for a client, just when we have the PPM ready to go, everything else was ready to go, we just go ahead and file Form D anyway, just to get it out of the way. But technically, the Form D doesn't have to be filed until 15 days after the first sale of the first investor comes in. Then you would be required to file Form D, not only with the federal SEC, but also with the wherever the state or jurisdiction where the investor resides, right? So that's when do you file Form D? That like I said, usually there's no penalty for filing it early, but you don't want longer than 15 days to go by before filing Form D. Could you file it late? Yeah, certainly you could file it late. If it's really late, like I've had clients say, "Oh, we did this deal like a year or two ago. Should we file Form D?" Yeah, maybe. Certainly, you want to file it at the federal level because the SEC doesn't really review them. So it just be a matter of record. Because sometimes when you're doing later stage investments, sometimes investors will go back or their securities counsel will go back and say, "Hey, what exemption did you rely upon to do these funding transactions?" And if you have a Form D on file, that gives them a little bit of assurance that you are qualified within a safe harbor exemption. But anyway, but yeah, Mary, 15 days. Don't let it go longer than 15 days as a rule. Bill here says he has I've got investors in Greece and other parts of Europe. Can they invest? The answer to that is yes. Obviously you want to provide them with full disclosure. Full disclosure is required not just in the United States, but most countries have their own securities laws, and you definitely want to make sure you're compliant with those laws. But usually, we'll talk more about this in a future maybe episode. But Regulation S, as in SAM, governs non-U.S. investors, right? So if they live outside the United States and they're not a citizen of the United States, and the transaction occurs technically outside the United States, then Regulation S would cover that transaction. Some clients, you raise all the capital that they need through Regulation S. They never even file a Form D. There's no form to be filed. They just have to make sure that the investors make certain representations that they are in fact non-U.S. and also they're not investing on behalf of a U.S. person, and they're also covenanting not to resell to a U.S. person for at least 9 months. Anyway, so Bill, the answer is yes. You can accommodate non-U.S. investors in Greece or wherever. I'll take this last question. We try to keep these to about 45 minutes. But we may do longer sessions if we have more questions. But John here, hey, what's the difference between an exempt offering and a registered offering? And that's a great question. Oftentimes, you'll see language in the PPM that says, hey, this offering is not registered with the SEC, right? And a lot of people think, oh, well, I have a PPM and we filed Form D, so aren't we registered because we filed Form D? Where you're not registered with the SEC. You filed a notice of exemption with the SEC, right? So as a general, as a blanket rule of thumb, everything needs to be registered or exempt from registration, right? Exemptions are, like we talk about, Regulation D, Regulation Crowdfunding, Regulation A, Regulation S. These are all exemptions from registration, meaning that you don't have to register them as long as they follow these rules. Just because you file Form D doesn't, I've seen that happen where that'll sneak into their pitch deck. Oh, we filed with the SEC under Form D. We registered with them. No, you didn't. You filed a notice of exemption, right? And so it's important to make that clear. You don't want to represent to investors, oh, yeah, we're registered with the SEC when you're not, when you're operating under exemptions from registration. You just want to make that clear. But anyway, but that's certainly the difference, right? Being registered with the SEC means that you filed you filed under the Securities Act, and the SEC did their review, and usually like a public offering or like a Regulation A is an example of a registered offering, right? Whereas Regulation D and Regulation crowdfunding are exemptions, right? Anyway, so that's hopefully gives you a good overview. As far as the capital source that we talked about, if you want to message us, we can definitely introduce you to them. They have investors all over the world. Most, about a third of them are U.S. based. A third of them are in Asia, and about a third of them are in Europe. So really wide, around 32,000 different kinds of investors. So anyway, we appreciate you attending, and the next session that we'll be doing we'll be diving into the details of a PPM, essential PPM provisions. I actually have to, I'm headed to Europe next week, so I may do that forum session from there. We'll put out an email and a notice of when that's supposed to occur, and that way you can tune in. Or obviously, if it doesn't fit your time schedule, these are all going to be recorded, so you can tune in and watch on your own time. So anyway, appreciate you attending today. Hopefully it was helpful, valuable, and if this kind of content is interesting to you, feel free to share it. We'd love to have more and more subscribers coming in, and like I said, if there's something more in detail that we need to help you with that's not covered in the forum, you can always reach out to the law firm, talk to Colby or Mary or whoever, and we definitely help you with that. So, or if there's topics that you want to see covered in the forum in the future, definitely let us know. You can see on the inside the PPM Capital Forum, you'll see a listing of the next 12 months of planned topics, but we certainly can mix that up and change that around if there's demand for it. So anyway, I hope you have a good weekend, and thanks for watching. Thank you.